Okay, last but not least, on the social Trinitarian models is what we call is perichoretic unity. Perichoretic comes from perichoresis. And in classical theology, perichoresis is the union of the divine and human nature in Christ. And we're going to talk more about perichoresis when we do Christology, but that's not yet. So perichoresis literally means like intermingling, right? Interpenetration. Perichoresis is something like this, right? And in classical theology, it's used to denote the way in which the divine nature fully and completely penetrates the human nature of Christ. And likewise, depending on who you're talking to, maybe the human nature of Christ fully and completely interpenetrates the divine nature. Such that you can, I mean, it's easy here to see the difference between my two hands, right? It's very clear that while they're intertwined, while they're interpenetrating, it's clear which one's which. You can tell them apart. But in classical theology, the union of the divine and human nature in the person of Jesus is so whole and so total that there are two natures, but there's one Jesus. They're so fully, completely bound together that for all practical purposes, Jesus has, in any functional way, in any way that you encounter Jesus, you're encountering one person. And that's because every aspect of Jesus' humanity is infused or subsumed or assumed by divinity. And perhaps, in some ways, every aspect of Jesus' divinity, and here the classical theologians would balk, but that's okay. Perhaps every aspect of Jesus' divinity is in some ways meets or encounters or fuses with Jesus' humanity. John Zizioulas is a Greek Orthodox theologian, and he suggests that this model for Jesus' human and divine natures, this perichoretic unity, that's how we should think about the divine relations between the persons of the Godhead. And so what he says is, instead of thinking about divine being as either one God in three persons, or three persons who are so in sync that they're one God, instead think of the divine nature as the perichoretic union, the perichoretic relationships holding between the persons. Hold on there. So, Father, Son, Spirit. Okay. What Zizioulas is suggesting is that God, or the divine essence, is this right here. To be God. What it is to be God is to have these relations eternally interpenetrating each other, eternally uniting, right? The relations between the Father and the Spirit, the Father and the Son and the Spirit, the Son and the Father, the Spirit and the Son. These relations, this right here, that is divine essence. It is the very being of God to relate to God's self. Right? What it is to be God is for the Father to send the Son in the power of the Spirit. What it is to be God is for the Spirit to overcome the distance of the sent Son and the Father in resurrection. What it is to be God is to be the actualization, the fulfilling and the realization of the Father's will in the Son to the glorification of the Father by the power of the Spirit. What you've noticed there in the language is that there's You can't describe anything about the Godhead without invoking the relations between the three persons, right? Everything we say about God is manifested in the relations between Father, Son, and Spirit. That's kind of a weird way of thinking about it, and so a lot of people have tried to come up with images for what this might look like. And images are always going to fail, but one that's become very popular, or at least was for a while, and they go in and out, but is the notion of the divine dance, right? So, if you've ever seen a particularly well-executed tango, you note that there are two partners, right? But when they perform in perfect synchronization, and they have each of their own roles, and yet they know their roles and the roles of the other, and their goal is to enact the dance. They begin to spin really fast, right? And at a certain point, because of the closeness of their relationship, even though they're performing different aspects of the dance, in their performance of the dance, they are one. And they're one person. Similarly, that's one way of, I think Clark Pinnock popularized that amongst evangelicals in Flame of Love. But I think that actually may have come from Lacuna. I think she's a feminist theologian. I think she may have been the first to suggest this. But whatever the case, wherever it comes from, the notion is that you can't talk God faithfully without talking the relations, economic and immanent, holding between Father, Son, and Spirit, and Spirit, Son, and Father, and Spirit, Father, Son, and Son, Spirit, Father, etc. To me, I think this personally is the most promising, I think, of the social Trinitarian models. Certainly, it still it certainly seems to be emphasizing the threeness rather than the oneness. But I think, and this is where I follow Jürgen Moltmann, but at one point Moltmann, for those of you who don't know, Moltmann is a social Trinitarian and has been accused 1,000 times of being a tritheist. They're like, Moltmann, you're always talking about the Father doing this, the Son doing that, the Spirit. How is this not tritheism? And what Moltmann says is, he says, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but in the actual practice of the church, so long as we maintain a balance in our language, so long as we always are confessing God as one, and yet seeing God's oneness manifested in relations between the Father, Son, and the Spirit, our tendency towards tritheism is going to get pulled back by our language of oneness. And likewise, our oneness language is going to be pushed into a perichoretic analysis of how the three persons are functioning, are dancing to make that oneness. And so every action of God and every being of God can be understood in terms of the relations and the interpenetration, the intermingling of the Father and the Son and the Spirit eternally. And this actually makes for some really fun and really, I think, helpful ways of conceiving of how it is that the Father sends the Son into the world. Right? Doesn't that seem odd for one being to send that being self into the world? We're not going to do it this week, but we're going to begin to start thinking through what divine acts look like. And to see that divine acts are the one God relating as Father, Son, and Spirit to accomplish the one God's desire and will for the universe.